The dry desert air, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and distant creosote, did little to penetrate the thick walls of the structure I currently occupied. This wasn't a place for the faint of heart or for the uninitiated. It was a desert safe house with portable money counter humming, a temporary clandestine laboratory I'd set up for a recent consultation. The rhythmic whir and click of the counter, a stark contrast to the silence outside, was almost meditative. Each processed bill a tiny percussion in the desolate quiet. I ran a gloved hand over the fine grit that perpetually coated every surface, a testament to the landscape's relentless nature. My current task involved identifying trace elements on a collection of ancient coins, a rather lucrative, if legally ambiguous side gig for a certain collector who preferred discretion. My focus, usually absolute, was fractured today. The call had come in an hour ago, cutting through the low hum. It was the detective, his voice tight, strained, even over a crackling satellite connection. Dr. Alistair Finch, dead. Blackwood Manor, an accidental fall. I'd known Alistair not well, but enough to respect his meticulous nature. A celebrated historian, an expert in forgotten lineages and archaic land deeds, he was a man who measured his words, his steps, his entire life with precision. Accidental fall felt like a cheap veneer over something far more complex. I packed my specialized tools, each brush, caliper, and microspatula nestled in its custom foam cutout. The desert safe house, for all its utility, felt suddenly confining. My mind was already racing ahead, picturing Blackwood Manor. It was a place steeped in history, a sprawling stone edifice that had stood sentinel over its own valley for centuries, whispering tales of colonial ambition and ancestral secrets. The drive was long, the landscape slowly transitioning from barren ochre to the rolling, verdant hills that cradled the old estate. As I navigated the winding gravel path leading up to the manor, the air grew cooler, heavier with the scent of damp earth and ancient moss. The manor itself loomed, a silhouette against the bruised afternoon sky, its gray stone walls exuding a sense of profound age. A scattering of official vehicles, their lights muted, dotted the gravel drive, their presence a stark interruption to the manor's timeless facade. The detective met me at the main entrance, his face a mask of weary professionalism. "Seth," he greeted, a nod. "Glad you could make it. Messy business." "So I heard," I replied, my voice steady. "What's the official word?" "Preliminary assessment points to an accidental fall. He was found at the base of the grand staircase. Looks like he lost his footing, tumbled down." The detective gestured vaguely towards the cavernous main hall. "Head trauma, neck fracture. Nasty." I offered no immediate comment, merely absorbed the information, filtering it through my own forensic lens. Accidents happened, of course. But Alistair Finch? A man whose entire life was built on careful consideration? My gut, a well-honed instrument over decades, twinged with skepticism. Uniformed officers moved with a quiet reverence, their movements almost apologetic in the face of the grand, somber architecture. At its base, marked by bright yellow evidence markers, was where Alistair had been found. I began my initial walkthrough, my eyes scanning, absorbing. I moved with a deliberate slowness, my gaze sweeping from the high vaulted ceilings down to the worn flagstones of the floor. The detective watched me, accustomed to my methodical approach. I paid attention to the ambient light, the temperature, the almost imperceptible drafts that moved through the ancient house. Every detail was a potential clue, a piece of the puzzle. My first impression of the scene itself was one of carefully maintained chaos. There were no signs of a struggle evident on the rug, no disturbed furniture. It looked on the surface exactly as an accidental fall might appear. But my eyes snagged on a small, almost imperceptible detail near the bottom step, just beyond where the body had rested. It wasn't blood. It was too pale, too thin. It looked like something old, something that had been worn away by time. yet now had been freshly disturbed. I knelt, pulling a small, high-powered magnifying glass from my kit. The smear, under magnification, resolved into a faint residue of what appeared to be dried, pulverized clay, almost like ancient dust. It didn't belong. The manor was pristine, meticulously cared for. This wasn't the kind of dust one found in a well-maintained stately home. It was the kind of dust one found in a forgotten tomb, or perhaps on an artifact recently unearthed. My gaze drifted from the banister to the body, or rather, to the outline on the rug. The angle of the impact, the detective had said, suggested a simple tumble. But the clay residue, an anachronism in this refined setting, introduced a discordant note. An internal alarm bell, soft but insistent, began to toll. This was no simple accident. Something far older, far more complex, had played a part in Alistair Finch's demise. I felt the familiar pull of a deep, unsettling mystery drawing me in. The air in the library, thick with the scent of aged paper and something metallic sweet, seemed to press in on me. Alistair Finch lay crumpled near a massive, ornate globe, its brass meridian skewed. The detective, a broad-shouldered man with weary eyes, waited by the doorway, his presence a silent demand for answers I wasn't ready to give. I needed to see. Really see. I knelt, my kit bag thudding softly on the Persian rug. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the subtle creak of the old house settling around us. He lay on his left side, one arm twisted beneath him, the other flung out, fingers splayed as if reaching for something that wasn't there. A small, dark pool had spread beneath his head, staining the intricate floral patterns of the rug. I started with the broader picture. The angle of impact, the trajectory implied by the position relative to the broken railing of the mezzanine above. Standard procedure. The detective had described a fall from the second-story landing. My initial sweep confirmed the broken baluster. Splintered wood hanging like jagged teeth. A plausible point of origin. But plausibility was often a thin veneer. I began my meticulous examination of Finch's remains. I donned gloves, then carefully maneuvered around him, taking photographs from every cardinal direction, documenting the scene before any physical contact. His tweed jacket was rumpled, a leather elbow patch scuffed, but otherwise, the clothing seemed undisturbed by a violent tumble. No obvious tears, no significant abrasions that suggested a frantic struggle against gravity or impact with multiple obstacles during a long fall. This was already a point of friction against the simple accident narrative. With the initial visual survey complete, I moved closer. My fingers, practiced and gentle, explored the contours of his skull. The impact to the back of his head was significant, consistent with a fall. Yes, but the pattern of the injury, a stellate fracture, seemed almost too clean, too focal. A single catastrophic point of impact. My internal clock began ticking faster. I used my magnifying loupe, sweeping it over his exposed skin, his hands, his face. No defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle on his forearms or knuckles. That was curious. A man falling, even unexpectedly, usually throws out an arm, tries to break his fall. Finch's hands were mostly unmarred, save for a few minor abrasions on the left palm, consistent with impact on the rug, not a frantic grab at a railing or wall. Then I focused on the bone structure. I carefully palpated the limbs, seeking any subtle give, any unnatural movement. My fingers traced the length of his humerus, his femur. Nothing immediately apparent. But then, as I gently manipulated his right forearm, a barely perceptible crepitation, a faint, almost inaudible grind reached my fingertips. It was deep, not a surface injury. I felt it again, applying the absolute minimum pressure. Microscopic fractures. Not a clean break, not a shatter, but a series of tiny, almost invisible fissures radiating through the bone. These were not typical of a single blunt force trauma from a fall. A fall from that height, onto that rug, should have produced a different stress pattern, more catastrophic, or at least more uniformly distributed. These microscopic fractures suggested a localized twisting force applied with precision before the terminal impact, or perhaps during a very specific kind of impact, not consistent with a simple, uncontrolled tumble. My mind raced, constructing scenarios. A struggle, perhaps? A specific grip? I leaned back, my gaze sweeping the room again. The detective remained by the door, a silent sentinel, his patience fraying at the edges, I could tell. I ignored him. My focus narrowed to the subtle nuances of the scene. My eyes drifted to Finch's clothing. The tweed, though largely intact, had minute flecks clinging to it. Not dust from the library, which would be fine, gray, and ubiquitous. This was different. A pale, almost iridescent shimmer, like finely ground mica, but with an unusual, almost crystalline texture. I carefully used a set of fine forceps and a sterile evidence swab to collect samples from the jacket, the trousers, and the small amount that had settled on the rug near his head. Under the portable microscope I carried, the particles resolved into distinct angular structures, glinting faintly. This wasn't local dust. This wasn't plaster from the ceiling or stone from the manor walls. This was a mineral I hadn't seen in this region. Certainly not in the temperate, lush environment of the estate. It had a crystalline structure suggesting geological origin, perhaps volcanic, or even mineral deposits from a vastly different climate. Desert, perhaps? My gut tightened. The scent of dust and old paper, once pervasive, was now tinged with the faint metallic tang of suspicion. The microscopic bone fractures, the unusual trace evidence. They coalesced into a narrative far more sinister than a tragic accident. Finch hadn't just fallen. He had been made to fall. My internal thoughts, usually a methodical procession of data points, abruptly fractured. A sharp, jarring image flashed into my mind, unbidden. A small, windowless room, bathed in the anemic glow of a single bare bulb. A metal table, stark and utilitarian, piled high with stacks of currency. It was a place of transaction, of consequence. A place where fortunes shifted and lives were quietly, irrevocably altered. I shook my head, clearing the unexpected mental interlude. Focus, Seth. The facts were here, on this rug, on this body. Alistair Finch had been murdered. The game had begun. The metallic tang that had clung to the air in the library, a scent I now recognized as something more than just old brass and aged paper, had followed me. I'd carefully scraped samples of the fine, almost invisible dust from the crevices of the ornate globe and from beneath the hem of Alistair Finch's tweed jacket. My hands, still steady despite the gnawing unease, worked with practiced precision. The detective had simply watched, his silence a heavy cloak. Back in my temporary workspace, a borrowed corner of a university's mineralogy department, a place thankfully devoid of any clinical feel, just the hum of specialized equipment, I set up the scanning electron microscope. The samples, tiny specks against the dark stub of a carbon tape, swam into focus. What I saw wasn't ordinary house dust, nor the typical detritus of an old library. The particles were crystalline, angular, with a distinct layered structure. Their elemental composition, once analyzed, solidified my hunch. A unique blend of silicates and rare earth minerals, specifically a variant of monazite group phosphates, laced with traces of dysprosium. My mind immediately went to the geological maps I'd memorized over the years. This wasn't a common find. This was specific, pointing to a particular geologically anomalous region in the high desert, miles from any established settlement, or, more importantly, any sanctioned archaeological site. This was my reveal discovery. The dust wasn't just dust. It was a geological signature. I pulled up Alistair Finch's published works, then his lesser-known articles, and finally, after some digital digging through a university server I still had access to, his more obscure, recently submitted grant proposals. Nothing. Finch, the meticulous historian, had no public or even semi-private interest in desert geology or remote mining operations. But then I remembered a passing comment from a colleague at a conference a few months back, an offhand remark about Finch getting unusually territorial over some new, unverified historical claims tied to a remote desert area. Obsessed with finding something truly ancient, something lost, the colleague had said, dismissing it as Finch's typical academic fervor. It clicked. The dust, the desert, the lost something? Finch hadn't been researching geology. He'd been researching history at that specific geological anomaly. An unsanctioned dig. The kind of place where things could go very wrong, very quickly. My journey to the high desert was a blur of asphalt and rising temperatures. The landscape transformed from rolling hills into scrubland, then into a vast ochre expanse punctuated by jagged rock formations. The air grew thinner, drier, tasting of dust and distant sagebrush. My rental SUV, a sturdy but unremarkable model, kicked up plumes of fine red powder as I veered off the paved road onto a barely discernible track. The GPS signal wavered, then died, leaving me reliant on a topographical map and a compass. This was the kind of isolation that swallowed secrets whole. After an hour of bone-jarring travel, I found it. A shallow depression in the earth, half filled with wind-blown sand, revealing the faint outlines of what might have once been a trench. Shovels, pickaxes, and tarpaulins lay strewn haphazardly, partially buried, as if the crew had vanished mid-task. It was undeniably an archaeological dig, recently abandoned. The mineral dust was everywhere, a fine coating on the discarded equipment, sparkling faintly in the harsh sunlight. Finch had been here. My next step was to find Finch's estranged research assistant. Finch had a reputation for burning bridges, and this assistant, a brilliant but volatile young man named Marcus, had been the latest casualty. I'd pulled a contact number from Finch's digital records, a number that led me down a rabbit hole of burner phones and coded messages. It took me another day, following a convoluted trail of digital breadcrumbs and old favors called in, but I finally got a lead. Marcus wasn't at his usual haunts. He was holed up, or so I was told, far from the university. The address I received led me even deeper into the desert, to a dilapidated structure that barely qualified as a building. The distinct whirring sound, a rapid, rhythmic click-clack, was unmistakable, even through the thick walls. It was the sound of large sums of cash being processed. This was no academic retreat. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the small but effective tool I carried for such occasions. A heavy-duty multi-tool, not a weapon, but a deterrent. I knocked. The humming stopped abruptly. A long moment passed. Then the door creaked open just enough for a wary eye to peer out. "Marcus?" I asked, my voice calm, belying the knot in my stomach. "I'm Seth. I need to talk to you about Alistair Finch." The door opened wider, revealing a young man whose face was etched with exhaustion and a palpable fear. His eyes darted past me, scanning the empty desert. The smell of stale coffee and desperation hung heavy in the air. "What about him?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse, his gaze avoiding mine. He looked thinner than his university photos, his clothes rumpled. He was clearly under duress, the fear radiating from him like heat. The circumstances of his death, the dust at the scene, it points here, to this region, to an unsanctioned dig site. I kept my voice low, even. Finch was looking for something out here, wasn't he? Something beyond conventional history. Marcus flinched at the mention of the dig site. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his eyes darting to the money counter, then back to me. A lost artifact. He called it the heart of the old world. Said it would rewrite everything. That it was hidden away, deliberately, for centuries. Hidden by whom? I pressed, stepping further into the room, closing the door behind me. And what does that have to do with you being here, with this? I gestured to the stacks of cash. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He started having meetings, Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond my shoulder, as if remembering a nightmare. Hushed meetings with enigmatic figures. They weren't academics. They talked about acquisition and preservation. They promised him access, funding, protection. Finch was convinced they were patrons, helping him uncover a truth the world wasn't ready for. He laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. He was so naive. He thought he was leading them. "And what did you think?" I asked, my eyes searching his face. "I thought he was walking into a trap," Marcus said, finally meeting my gaze, and in his eyes I saw not just fear, but a flicker of genuine regret. He started talking about changing the world, about a legacy. He didn't see the strings. Finch wasn't just a victim of a tragic fall, and I had just stepped onto the same dangerous chessboard. The air at the dig site was a shroud, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and something else, something acrid and metallic, clinging faintly to the disturbed soil. I'd driven the winding track again, the jeep kicking up plumes of red dust, my mind replaying the anomalies from Finch's remains. Newer. I stepped out, the silence pressing in. The site had been officially closed for weeks, yet the ground told a different story. Fresh tire tracks, distinct from the heavy treads of the university's excavation vehicles, cut across a section near the most promising trench. They were shallower, indicating a lighter, faster vehicle, and they veered off into the brush where no official dig would ever go. Near the main excavation pit, where Finch had supposedly been working, I found it. Not a large disturbance, but enough. A section of newly turned earth, carelessly backfilled, stood out against the weathered strata. It wasn't a professional job. This was hurried, clandestine. I knelt, sifting the soil through my gloved fingers. Beneath a thin layer of topsoil, I felt something hard. I pulled it free. It was a shard of pottery, no larger than my thumbnail, dark and unglazed, with a distinct geometric pattern etched into its surface. My breath caught. This wasn't local. It wasn't even from the known period of the estate's historical significance. Anachronistic, just like the tiny, almost imperceptible flecks of mineral I'd found embedded in Finch's bones. This wasn't just a dig site. It was a clandestine marketplace. Or worse, a quarry for illicit goods. A voice, sharp and laced with impatience, cut through my thoughts. "Still at it, Seth?" I straightened, turning to face the lead investigator. He stood by his patrol vehicle, arms crossed, his uniform crisp despite the heat. His gaze was narrow, unyielding. "Just confirming a few things, investigator." "Confirming what?" "The preliminary report is clear. Tragic fall. Finch was careless, stumbled, hit his head. Happens." He gestured vaguely at the rocky outcrop above the pit. "The department needs this wrapped up. The estate's owners are getting antsy, and it certainly isn't from the period we're studying here." He squinted at the shard, then waved it off with a dismissive hand. "Could be anything. Old trash. Kids playing. We've got limited resources. The case is closed. My report goes in tomorrow." His tone left no room for argument. The pressure was palpable, a heavy weight meant to crush any further inquiry. The investigator's ultimatum solidified my resolve. I knew I was right. Back in my lab, the sterile environment usually brought a sense of calm, a place where logic reigned supreme. But as I pushed open the door, a prickle of unease snaked down my spine. The air felt wrong, stagnant, but also disturbed. I stepped inside, my senses on high alert. Nothing was overtly broken, no smashed windows or splintered door frames. Yet, a file cabinet drawer, usually meticulously aligned, was a hair's breadth ajar. My desk chair was angled slightly differently than I'd left it. A stack of archived reports, which I'd organized alphabetically, now had one volume subtly out of place, its spine facing the wrong direction. They hadn't taken anything. My microscope, the spectral analysis equipment, the bone samples, all were untouched. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. My lab had been breached, my sanctuary violated. They hadn't wanted to steal. They wanted me to know they could get in, they could watch. My phone vibrated, a sudden jolt in the quiet room. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, my thumb hovering over the speaker icon. There was no voice, only a single grainy image that filled the screen. It was an aerial shot, blurry but distinct. A remote, windowless structure, stark against an ochre landscape of red rock and scrub. They weren't just watching. They were actively telling me what I was up against. The image, the words, the implied sound of illicit wealth being processed. It painted a picture far grander and more dangerous than a simple academic cover-up. Finch wasn't just a victim. He was a casualty in a sophisticated operation, and now I was firmly in their sights. The anachronistic pottery, the mineral flecks, the pressure from local authorities, and now this targeted warning. The pieces weren't just aligning, they were locking into place, forming a blueprint of a conspiracy that stretched deeper and wider than I had ever imagined. The pottery fragment lay cool and inert on my examination table, a deceptive shard of history. Under the focused beam of my microscope, the texture shifted, revealing intricacies invisible to the naked eye. I'd seen thousands of these in my career, genuine relics, carefully excavated, painstakingly cataloged. This one felt different, had felt different since I'd first picked it up in the dusty study. The anachronistic detail I'd initially dismissed as a trick of the light, a manufacturing anomaly, now screamed for closer inspection. I adjusted the magnification. My breath held. The glaze, a deep, rich ochre, appeared flawlessly ancient, mimicking the distinctive style of the early Cycladic period. But as I traced the edge of a stylized figure etched into its surface, a subtle irregularity emerged. Not a natural crack, nor a wear pattern from millennia of burial. It was a microfracture, almost imperceptible, radiating from a point where the pigment was infinitesimally thicker, almost too perfect. I reached for my microstylus, gently probing the area. This wasn't aged clay. This was a composite, a meticulously layered modern polymer designed to replicate the brittle fragility of ancient pottery. The pigment itself, while chemically similar to ancient dyes, contained trace elements that spoke of contemporary synthesis, not natural mineral grinding. It was a masterwork of deception. My fingers tightened around the fragment. Finch wasn't just researching ancient artifacts. He was documenting a sophisticated high-stakes forgery. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The tragic fall narrative, the initial cover-up I'd suspected, now twisted into something far more elaborate, far more dangerous. That wasn't just about illicit trade. It was about the profit from illicit trade, from something like this. The scale of the operation Finch had stumbled upon was immense. The estate, once a place of academic intrigue, now felt like a stage for a much darker play. If he was investigating a forgery ring of this magnitude, he wouldn't have left his findings out in the open. He'd have hidden them. The study was exactly as I'd left it, a mausoleum of forgotten research and academic pursuits. The air hung heavy with the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. I ran my hands along the spines of books, feeling for loose bindings. The desk, a heavy oak monstrosity, was my next target. I knelt, examining the underside, running my fingers along the rough-hewn grain. Nothing. I checked the drawers, not just for their contents, but for false bottoms or hidden compartments. Again, nothing. Finch was too clever for obvious hiding spots. I stood, frustration coiling in my gut. Where would a man like Finch, a man who dealt in the hidden histories of the world, conceal something vital? Not in plain sight, but in plain ignorance. My gaze drifted to the large, ornate globe standing in the corner, its brass meridian tarnished with age. I spun it idly, my mind still racing. Then, my fingers brushed against the base, a heavy carved pedestal that seemed disproportionately large for the globe itself. I ran my hand along the intricate carving, feeling for an uneven seam, a slight give. I pressed it. I reached into the cavity, my fingers closing around two items. The first was a slim, battered USB drive, its casing scratched but intact. The second was a rolled-up parchment, brittle with age, tied with a thin, faded red ribbon. I pulled them out, placing them carefully on the desk. The USB drive, no doubt containing encrypted files, held the promise of Finch's digital research. But it was the parchment that captivated me. I untied the ribbon, unrolling the map with extreme care. It wasn't a standard cartographic representation. It was a crude, hand-drawn sketch, filled with unfamiliar symbols and cryptic annotations in Finch's distinctive spidery script. Lines radiated from a central point marked with an X, leading to various seemingly random locations. A cluster of ruins, a barren peak, a winding river. Some points were circled, accompanied by dates that seemed out of sequence. Others by single, archaic words I didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't just a map. It was a coded puzzle, a key to the entire operation. The forgery, the illicit trade, the desert safe house. It all began to coalesce into a terrifyingly clear picture. And now I was holding the pieces of his final dangerous legacy. The pottery fragment, with its micro-etched symbol, had been a key, not to the lock on a physical door, but to a digital one. My examination table, still holding the inert shard, was now miles away, in a secure official facility. I, however, was not. The air conditioning unit, struggling against the outside heat, rattled a persistent rhythm, a counterpoint to the soft whirring of the money counter that sat incongruously on a nearby folding table, its display dark, but its internal mechanism still cycling. The safe house was sparse. Concrete floor, one small window covered by thick, corrugated steel, and a single cot pushed against a wall. Dust motes danced in the sliver of sunlight that managed to pierce the barricade. It wasn't where I usually worked, but the information I'd uncovered had demanded immediate, untraceable action. My colleague, a specialist in digital forensics, had insisted on the move. "Too many eyes on this now, Seth," he'd warned, his voice low and urgent over a secure line. The historian hadn't been a cryptographer, but he'd used a system rooted in archaic linguistic structures, a kind of historical cipher. It was a language I understood better than most, the forgotten tongues of ancient cultures, my lifelong obsession. Each decoded phrase, each unraveled symbol, felt like peeling back layers of time itself. They weren't just prominent, they were titans of industry, collectors of unparalleled wealth, individuals whose public personas were beyond reproach. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a small-time operation. This was systemic. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The air in the safe house, despite the AC, felt heavy, charged with the weight of illicit fortunes. The next set of files, labeled only with a single cryptic symbol matching the one on the pottery fragment, proved even more challenging. They were image files, corrupted and fragmented, but my software slowly stitched them together. These weren't purchase orders or manifests. They were genealogical charts, meticulously detailed, spanning centuries, connecting these wealthy collectors to specific historical lineages. The Keepers, a text file finally revealed, the words appearing stark against the dark screen. Guardians of the Legacy. My breath hitched. The Legacy. The phrase recurred throughout the historian's notes, always capitalized, always with an almost reverential tone. It wasn't just about collecting. It was about preserving something, controlling something. And the Keepers, they weren't just buyers, they were custodians. Here, the historian's own analysis began to surface, a desperate, fragmented narrative. He spoke of the Great Forgery, a sustained, generations-long effort to alter key historical records, to recontextualize genuine artifacts, to erase certain truths and emphasize others. The purpose, he speculated, was to solidify a particular self-serving narrative, one that justified their power and influence, rooted in a fabricated past. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about selling fake relics for profit. This was about manipulating the very fabric of history, weaving a web of deceit so vast and ancient it defied belief. The pottery fragment, the historian's fall, they were just threads in this immense tapestry. The historian hadn't just discovered a conspiracy. He'd stumbled into a war over truth itself. And now, so had I. The names I'd seen, the faces in the photographs, they weren't just collectors. They were architects of an engineered past, and anyone who threatened their carefully constructed reality became a liability. I had to expose them no matter the cost. The phrase "the legacy" echoed in my mind, a persistent, unsettling refrain. It wasn't just about collecting, the historian's notes had insisted. It was about preserving something, controlling something. And the keepers, they weren't just buyers. They were custodians. Custodians of what, exactly? A dark history? A forgotten truth? My gut tightened with the implication. This was far beyond a simple artifact trade. My next step was clear, albeit risky. He was a ghost, a whisper in the annals of cultural institutions, yet his name appeared repeatedly in the historian's early research notes, always with a deferential acknowledgement. Tracking him down took me to the fringes of the city, then beyond, into the parched ochre landscape of the outer desert. The sun beat down, baking the air, and dust plumed behind my vehicle like an angry spirit. Finally, a low, nondescript structure emerged from the shimmering heat haze. A blocky, utilitarian building that seemed more like an abandoned depot than a residence. No windows faced the track, only a single heavy steel door. I knocked, the sound deadened by the thick metal. Silence stretched, then a faint, almost imperceptible hum began to emanate from within. It was rhythmic, mechanical, and deeply out of place in this silent, desolate expanse. I knocked again, harder. After a long moment, the door cracked open a sliver, revealing a single, wary eye. "Can I help you?" The voice was raspy, aged, laced with an unmistakable weariness. "My name is Seth," I stated, keeping my tone even, my hands visible. "I'm investigating the death of the historian. I believe you knew him." The eye narrowed. "Many people knew him." "You were his mentor years ago at the Institute," I pressed. "I need to ask you about his work, specifically about the legacy and the keepers." The eye disappeared, and for a moment I thought the door would close. Instead, it slowly opened wider, revealing a man whose face was a roadmap of past anxieties. His hair, once probably dark, was now a sparse halo of white around a bald pate. He wore a faded work shirt, stained with what looked like engine grease. The space was a peculiar mix of a makeshift office and a workshop. Papers, maps, and what looked like archaeological diagrams were tacked to the walls. Its digital display glowed a stark red, showing a number that made my stomach clench. My eyes flicked back to the curator, then to the money. This was no quiet retirement. This was an active, clandestine operation. "What do you know about the legacy?" the curator asked, his gaze sharp, assessing. He spoke of anachronistic details, of finds that shouldn't exist where they were discovered, and he linked it to a group called the Keepers. The curator sighed, a deep, shuddering exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. He picked up a small, intricately carved stone figure from the bench, turning it over in his calloused fingers. The historian was a brilliant man. Too brilliant for his own good, perhaps. He met my gaze. "The keepers are real, Seth. Confirmation, just like that." "Who are they?" "A society," he began, his voice dropping, forcing me to lean in. Old money, old power. Generations of families quietly influencing the world of antiquities. They don't just collect artifacts, they control them. Not for profit, not primarily. For influence. They decide what is seen, what is hidden, what shapes our understanding of history. Political gain, financial leverage? Yes, but mostly it's about shaping narratives, preserving their version of a legacy. And the anachronistic details? I pressed, pulling a small plastic bag from my pocket. Inside, visible through the clear material, was a tiny pinch of the mineral dust I'd painstakingly collected from the historian's clothes in the scene. I found this, a unique mineral composition, not native to the region where the historian died. It's an ancient dust, but it was on him, recent. The curator took the bag, his eyes widening as he examined the minuscule particles. He brought it closer to a magnifying lamp. A private collection, housed in the Valerius estate. It's not public, never has been. Believed lost to time, mostly. The Valerius estate? I repeated, the name unfamiliar but instantly significant. A sprawling remote property, the curator elaborated, deep in the high desert, miles from any paved road. It's been in the Valerius family for centuries. They were the primary patrons of the keepers, back in the early days. Their estate is said to hold the oldest, most controversial pieces, the ones that could rewrite history if they ever saw the light of day. Pieces that don't fit. The pieces that don't fit. Anachronistic details. The unique mineral dust. The Valerius estate. A remote private estate. It was where the historian had been, where he'd encountered whatever had led to his death. And the dust, transported on his clothes, was a silent ancient witness. My mind raced, connecting the fragments. The historian hadn't just been researching the legacy. He had been actively trying to expose it, or perhaps retrieve something from it. And the keepers, with their vast resources and their need for control, wouldn't have tolerated that. The tension in the small, humming safe house was palpable, a live wire buzzing with danger. I had found my link, but in doing so, I'd stepped directly into the crosshairs of a society more powerful than I could have imagined. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a confrontation. It wasn't my money, nor my counter. I was a guest, or perhaps a tolerated fixture in this Spartan sun-baked refuge. The air was dry, tasting of dust and stale coffee. On a worn wooden table, my tools lay meticulously arranged beside printouts of satellite images of the Valerius estate. The pieces that don't fit. Anachronistic details. The unique mineral dust. It all clicked into place with a chilling precision. The Valerius estate. A remote private estate. And the dust, transported on his clothing, had been my final damning clue. The estate, owned by the industrialist and collector Elias Thorne, was not just a historical curiosity, it was a nexus. The mineral dust, a distinct blend of ancient volcanic ash and a specific rare earth element, pointed to a very particular, very remote archaeological site that had supposedly been undisturbed for centuries. Thorne's connections, his insatiable appetite for antiquities, and now the historian's death, formed a pattern too clear to ignore. I packed my kit, a miniaturized optical scanner, a set of lockpicks refined for ancient mechanisms, a high-resolution camera, and a pair of night vision goggles. The colleague who'd arranged this safe house had been explicit about the risks. Thorne's security was legendary, his reach extensive. But I couldn't wait for official channels. The trail was too fresh, the stakes too high. Hours later, the moon, a sliver of silver, hung over the jagged silhouette of the mountain range. Thorne's estate was a fortress carved into the rock face, blending seamlessly with the arid landscape. High walls, motion sensors, and a network of cameras were visible even from my distant vantage point. I'd spent the last 2 days studying the estate's blueprints, acquired through unofficial channels, dissecting its vulnerabilities. The main entrance was impenetrable. The service tunnels, however, were another story. I approached from the north, picking my way through the thorny scrub and loose rock. My breath plumed in front of me. I moved with the practiced stealth of someone who'd spent years in delicate environments, where a misplaced footstep could destroy millennia of history. I found the ventilation shaft access point, exactly where the schematics indicated, cleverly concealed by a natural rock overhang. The grate was secured with heavy-duty bolts, but the metal itself was old, corroded. My specialized tool, designed for extracting ancient samples from bedrock, made short work of the rusted heads. A soft click, then another. The air was stale, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, a faint, metallic tang. I moved through the narrow shaft, guided by the low hum of distant machinery and the cool drafts that indicated larger spaces. The blueprints in my mind were my only map. After what felt like an eternity, the shaft opened into a larger, cavernous area. I dropped lightly onto a concrete floor, my goggles now active, painting the world in shades of luminous green. This was no ordinary storage area. It was a workshop, state-of-the-art, yet subtly disguised. Banks of halogen lamps illuminated workbenches cluttered with microscopic tools, precision lathes, and an array of chemicals I didn't immediately recognize. Half-finished pieces lay under magnifying lamps. A Roman statuette missing an arm, an Egyptian funerary mask with one eye socket still unpainted, fragments of what appeared to be cuneiform tablets. The air here was heavy with the smell of plaster, stone dust, and a faint, acrid chemical odor. This wasn't restoration. This was creation. Forgery. Exquisite, dangerous forgery. The anachronistic details from the historian's body, the minute traces of modern polymers mixed with ancient pigments, they made perfect, horrifying sense now. Thorne wasn't just collecting. He was manufacturing history. My gaze swept the room, searching for the vault. The schematics indicated a hidden chamber, accessible only through this workshop. A faint seam, barely visible even under night vision, ran vertically down the rock face. I approached, running my gloved hand over the surface. It was cool, smooth, unnaturally so. I found the almost imperceptible pressure plate disguised as a natural rock outcrop. A firm press, a soft whirring sound, and a section of the rock wall slid inward, revealing a dimly lit passage. The passage led to a circular chamber, vast and echoing. This was it. The vault. Shelves, floor to ceiling, lined the walls, laden with artifacts. Not fakes. These were genuine. The raw, undeniable power of antiquity radiated from them. Gold funerary masks, obsidian blades, papyrus scrolls in climate-controlled cases, sarcophagi, intricate jewelry. Pieces from every major ancient civilization, all bearing the unmistakable hallmarks of legitimate archaeological finds. And the unique mineral dust, the very same I'd found on the historian, clung in fine layers to many of the items. It was a king's ransom, a museum's entire collection, all plundered, all stolen. My hand trembled as I lifted my camera, documenting everything. Red lights flashed, strobing across the ancient artifacts, painting them in a lurid, infernal glow. A voice, automated and synthesized, boomed through hidden speakers. Intruder detected. Security protocols initiated. All exits sealed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the blaring alarm. They knew. Thorne's advanced security had found me. I spun, the sliding rock door to the workshop already sealing shut. The passage back to the ventilation shaft was my only way out. I sprinted, the siren's shriek growing louder, the red lights blinding. I could hear heavy footfalls thudding in the workshop behind the closing door. I reached the ventilation shaft, scrambling back inside just as the steel door slammed shut with a final metallic clang. My escape route was still open, but barely. I crawled, my knees scraping against the rough metal, the adrenaline coursing through me. I could hear shouts, the distant clatter of tools being knocked over. They were close. Too close. I pushed harder, the images of the stolen artifacts burning in my mind, fueling my desperate climb towards the desert night. The evidence was irrefutable. Now, I just had to get out alive. The siren's shriek clawed at my ears, a predatory sound that promised capture. I didn't look back. The ventilation shaft, tight and dust-choked, was my only escape route, a desperate gamble against Thorne's advanced security. My muscles screamed as I scrambled through the narrow passage, the metallic tang of fear sharp in my mouth. Each scraping sound of my clothes against the ductwork felt amplified, a beacon for anyone searching. I pushed, elbowed, and wriggled, picturing the rock door grinding shut behind me, sealing off the workshop like a tomb. Minutes, or perhaps an eternity. Later, I tumbled out into the cool night air, landing hard on the sandy ground outside the estate's perimeter. The desert wind, dry and relentless, immediately began to erase my tracks. I didn't pause. My contact, a former colleague with a penchant for off-grid operations, had left a vehicle at a pre-arranged rendezvous point miles away. They knew I was there. They knew what I had seen. I reached the designated hideout just as the first streaks of dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised purples and oranges. It was a utilitarian structure, squat and unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the arid terrain. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. The low, rhythmic whir of the machine was the first thing I registered, a bizarre counterpoint to the silence I craved. My contact, it seemed, had been busy. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my evidence bag. No time for rest, no time to process the near miss. Finch's murder, the ancient artifacts, Thorne's chilling connection to the keepers. It all coalesced into a singular, urgent task. I pulled out my equipment, a portable microscope, a laptop, and the camera I'd used to document everything. The safe house was sparse but functional. A generator hummed somewhere outside, providing power. I spread the photographic evidence across a makeshift table, arranging the prints with clinical precision. Each image was a fragment of the truth, waiting to be assembled. First, the estate. Photos of the unique soil composition I'd found beneath Finch's fingernails, taken from a specific undisturbed patch near Thorne's private study, not the general garden soil. The faint, almost invisible fibers I'd collected from the torn edge of Finch's jacket, magnified to reveal their unusual weave. A blend I'd identified as being consistent with an ancient fabric, not modern tailoring. I remembered the glimpse of an intricately woven tapestry in Thorne's hidden chamber. The same distinct pattern. Then, the artifacts. My camera had captured high-resolution images of the pottery shards, the metallic ornaments, the petroglyphs carved into the cavern walls. I had cross-referenced several of the symbols with images from obscure archaeological texts I'd downloaded onto my laptop. The parallels were undeniable. These weren't mere curiosities. They were sacred objects, violently plundered. I focused on Thorne. My telephoto lens had given me a few crucial shots. Thorne speaking animatedly with the stranger I'd seen, the one with the distinctive scar, near a delivery van I'd previously noted at the estate. The van's license plate, blurred but decipherable, was registered to a shell company I'd flagged as suspicious during my initial background checks. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Thorne wasn't just a collector. He was a facilitator, perhaps even the architect of this illicit trade, using his estate as a hub. The Keepers. The name resonated with the hushed reverence I'd heard in the estate manager's voice, the fear in the eyes of the staff. It wasn't just a secret society. It was a criminal enterprise, dealing in cultural heritage, and Finch had stumbled onto their operation. His fall was no accident. He had been struck, then staged. The anachronistic details, the ancient soil, the unique fibers, were Thorne's undoing, tiny threads of truth he'd failed to sweep away. My fingers flew across the keyboard, compiling my report. I annotated each photograph, referenced each piece of trace evidence, built a chronological narrative of Finch's final hours, and laid bare Thorne's involvement. The sun climbed higher, baking the desert. I felt the heat seeping through the walls, but I barely noticed. My focus was absolute, my resolve hardened by the danger I'd faced. The local authorities I knew might be compromised. Thorne's reach was extensive, his reputation formidable. Presenting this evidence would be a direct challenge to a powerful, dangerous network. My life was no longer merely at risk, it was a certainty. But Finch deserved justice. And the truth, however inconvenient, had to emerge. I reviewed the final draft, checking for any logical gaps, any weak points. It was airtight. A forensic tapestry woven from minutiae, undeniable. I reached for my satellite phone, the weight of the device heavy in my hand. The time for hiding was over. The time for confrontation had arrived. I had to make the call. The metallic taste of fear, sharp and acrid, clung to my tongue as I clawed my way through the ventilation shaft. Every scrape of my elbows against the rough ducting, every shuddering breath I took felt impossibly loud. The siren's shriek, now a little more distant but still a visceral threat, echoed my own frantic pulse. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, a dizzying galaxy in my constricted world. My muscles screamed, a chorus of protest against the contorted angle of my body, but the alternative capture silence was unthinkable. Dr. Finch deserved more. Finally, the shaft terminated in a rickety grate overlooking the estate's outer perimeter, a section I'd noted during my initial, less frantic survey. I kicked it open, the rusted metal groaning in protest, and tumbled out, landing hard on the sandy ground, the impact jarring my teeth. I rolled, scrambling to my feet, my eyes scanning the moonlit landscape. A nondescript utility vehicle, its engine a low thrum, waited near a cluster of scrub brush, its driver's side door ajar. My contact, the investigative journalist I'd reached out to in desperation, waved me over. I didn't waste a second. The desert night air, cool and sharp, was a blessed relief after the stale, recycled air of the manor. I dove into the passenger seat as the journalist floored it, the tires spitting sand as we accelerated away, the manor's formidable silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror, its sirens fading into the vast, indifferent silence of the wilderness. Hours later, the sun was a crimson smear on the horizon when we pulled up to a nondescript single-story structure, blending seamlessly into the arid landscape. Inside, the air was surprisingly cool, a testament to its thick, insulated walls. The journalist gestured to a worn armchair. "Rest. You look like you wrestled a ghost." I nodded, exhaustion a leaden cloak, but my mind was already racing. On a scarred wooden table in the center of the room, a portable money counter whirred softly, a hypnotic rhythmic hum. Stacks of bundled currency lay beside it, evidence of Thorne's illicit trade, intercepted from a planned transfer earlier that morning, thanks to a tip from the journalist's anonymous source. It was a fraction of Thorne's wealth, but a tangible, undeniable link to his criminal enterprise. "This is just the start," the journalist said, pouring me a cup of black coffee. "The funds are traced. The authorities have the intel. They just need the final push, the undeniable proof you've been gathering." I ran a hand through my dust-caked hair. The proof is in the details. The anachronistic tool marks on the artifact fragments, the unique soil composition from the excavation sites, the subtle alterations to Dr. Finch's research notes. Finch was onto something deeper. These aren't just relics. They're fragments of a historical atrocity Thorne's ancestors were involved in. Finch found the telltale signs of malnutrition, the specific trauma patterns inconsistent with the official narrative. So, the keepers aren't just a ring of smugglers, the journalist mused. They're guardians of a lie. A very profitable, very powerful lie, I confirmed, my voice hardening. Finch was about to expose it. That's why she died, not a fall. The plan began to solidify. A public exposition, timed to coincide with a pre-arranged raid on Thorne's estate, leveraging the seized funds and the weight of scientific evidence. It was a risky gambit, demanding precision and perfect timing. Thorne won't go down quietly, the journalist warned, tapping a pen against her notebook. He has eyes everywhere. I know, I replied, my gaze fixed on the photographs of Dr. Finch's findings. But he underestimates the power of truth and the meticulousness of forensic science. The sun was high when we made the call to the lead detective. The pieces were in place. We had the evidence, the motive, and a clear path to expose the entire operation. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from a potent cocktail of anticipation and grim determination. Justice for Dr. Finch and for the countless others whose stories Thorne had tried to erase was finally within reach. The plan was set. I was going back to the estate, not to escape, but to confront. The estate, bathed in the harsh midday light, seemed to bristle with a new kind of menace. Our vehicle, an unmarked sedan this time, pulled up to the main gates. The journalist and I were flanked by 2 plainclothes officers, while a full tactical team, led by the detective, was already positioned around the perimeter. Thorne is inside, the detective stated, his voice low and gravelly. He knows we're coming. He's been tipped off about the funds. I gripped the evidence satchel tighter. This was it. The high-stakes confrontation. The moment I had been working towards since I first laid eyes on Dr. Finch's remains. We entered the manor, the grand hall echoing with our footsteps. We moved through the opulent rooms, past the priceless artifacts Thorne had so meticulously collected and distorted. Thorne stood by a large, antique desk, a faint smile playing on his lips, his eyes glinting with a dangerous intelligence. He wasn't surprised. He had been waiting. Dr. Seth, he drawled, his voice calm, almost amused. A rather dramatic return. I confess, I didn't expect you to resurface after your unfortunate escape. I came back for the truth, Thorne, I stated, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. I unzipped my satchel, pulling out the magnified photographs of the bone fragment, the soil samples, the altered notes, and I brought it with me. The detective stepped forward, holding up a warrant. Mr. Thorne, you are under arrest for the murder of Dr. Finch, the illicit trade of antiquities, and the obstruction of justice. Thorne merely chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Murder? Obstruction? You have no proof, just the ramblings of a desperate academic and a sensationalist journalist. We have this, I countered, pushing the photograph of the child's bone fragment across the desk. The specific trauma, the evidence of malnutrition, the carbon dating that places it precisely within the period of the suppressed massacre Dr. Finch was investigating. Your ancestors weren't preserving history, Thorne. They were burying a crime. And you, with your keepers, continued that legacy, silencing anyone who came close to exposing it. His smile faltered. Pointing to another photograph, this one showing microscopic tool marks on a piece of pottery. These marks match the unique pattern of a specific digging tool found in Dr. Finch's private collection. A tool that was used to excavate the very site where this child's remains were found. A site you claimed was untouched. Thorne's composure finally cracked. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. You think a few dirt samples and old bones will unravel centuries of carefully constructed truth? It's not truth, Thorne. It's a lie, I insisted, my voice rising with conviction. Dr. Finch was close to publishing her findings, to revealing the true nature of your family's involvement and the grotesque historical revisionism you've perpetuated. You didn't just push her, you erased her because she threatened the very foundation of your power and your distorted legacy. Suddenly, Thorne lunged, not at me, but at a hidden panel behind his desk. Before he could fully open it, the detective and the other officer moved, tackling him to the ground. A brief, violent struggle ensued. Thorne fighting with unexpected ferocity, but he was quickly subdued. As the officers cuffed him, I glanced at the newly revealed compartment. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a single ancient scroll, its parchment yellowed with age. It wasn't an artifact to be traded. It was a document. I reached in, my fingers trembling as I unfurled it slightly. It was a ledger, detailing names, dates, and locations. A list, the ultimate reveal. Finch hadn't just been close. She'd found the key. And Thorne had killed her to protect this. The adrenaline coursed through me, leaving me both shaken and profoundly resolute. The truth, painstakingly unearthed, had finally seen the light. The personal peril was real, but the justice, hard-won and absolute, was worth every risk. The struggle was brief, brutal. Thorne, a man I'd seen meticulously curating historical narratives, fought with the desperate, raw energy of a cornered animal. The detective and the other officer, well-trained and coordinated, brought him down with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless similar encounters. The metallic click of the handcuffs was sharp, final, cutting through the sudden silence. Thorne lay there, breathing heavily, his eyes still burning with a furious, unrepentant defiance as the detective hauled him to his feet. My gaze, however, was already fixed on the hidden panel behind the desk. Thorne's desperate lunge had dislodged it slightly, revealing a sliver of dark space within. The detective, after a quick assessing glance at his subdued prisoner, moved towards it. He gripped the edge Thorne had exposed, pulling with a grunt. The panel slid open with a soft thud, revealing not a safe, but a meticulously organized compartment lined with velvet. Inside, nestled amongst ancient parchment and small, intricately carved wooden boxes, sat a collection of artifacts that made the air hum with historical weight. My breath hitched. These weren't just valuable. They were pieces I'd only ever seen in heavily redacted academic papers, rumored to be lost, or worse, destroyed. Beside it, a scroll, its brittle edges hinting at centuries of age, tied with a faded crimson ribbon. This was it, the proof. Hours later, the world outside the estate had blurred into a rapid succession of flashing lights and hushed commands. The monotonous whir filled the air, a stark counterpoint to the quiet intensity of the work unfolding around me. The safe house was Spartan, functional. Cinder block walls, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a long metal table laden with the spoils of the raid. The artifacts, carefully cataloged and photographed, were spread out. The obsidian disc, the scroll, and several other pieces. Ancient coins, fragments of pottery, a small bronze figurine, lay under the cool glare of forensic lamps. But it was the documents, pulled from Thorne's hidden compartment and several other locations subsequently searched, that truly began to paint the full, horrifying picture. I sifted through ledgers detailing transactions stretching back decades, encrypted communications, and, most damningly, a series of handwritten journals. The cursive script, precise and elegant, belonged to Thorne. He meticulously documented not just the acquisition and sale of artifacts, but the ideology behind the Keepers. A secret society dedicated to manipulating historical narratives, burying inconvenient truths, and, in their twisted view, preserving a purer version of the past. They didn't just trade in history, they controlled it. They're an organized network, deeply entrenched. I nodded, tracing a finger over a diagram in one of Thorne's journals. A complex web of names, dates, and locations, stretching across continents. They've been operating for generations. The estate was just one node in a much larger system. The tragic fall was a calculated move to protect their operations, to maintain the illusion of control. The detective sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. We've got leads on several other individuals from these files. The public announcement will be significant. He paused, looking at me. Your initial assessment, those anachronistic details, they led us right to the heart of it. The truth, when it finally unraveled, was often less about triumph and more about the heavy weight of what had been lost, what had been hidden. The historian, a man I'd never met, had died for this. The next few days were a blur of reports, interviews, and the painstaking reconstruction of Thorne's empire. The stolen artifacts were recovered, their provenance meticulously documented, their true stories finally ready to be told. The news cycle was a frenzy, grappling with the sheer audacity of a secret society manipulating history for centuries. The emotional and psychological toll of the case was immense. I had pursued the truth with every fiber of my being, driven by the silent demands of the dead, by the integrity of the past. Justice had been served, in a fashion, but the cost felt heavy. The world felt sharper now, more dangerous. The work of a forensic anthropologist, I realized, extended far beyond the bones and the soil. This case, more than any other, had irrevocably changed me. The relentless pursuit of justice through science was not just a career, it was a calling, one that now felt infused with a new, more dangerous edge. I looked out at the city lights, a sprawling tapestry of human endeavor and hidden histories. Perhaps, I thought, my role was just beginning. Perhaps I was meant to walk this dangerous path, to continue to pull back the veil, one anachronistic detail at a time. The tension, though the immediate threat was gone, lingered like a phantom limb, a constant reminder of the vigilance required to protect the truth.